In this video, I'm going to show you how to create transition zones. These are useful when you want to have geometry that's shared between two adjacent zones that are normally visible through portals. This just allows you to have that one piece of geometry that overlaps the portal be simultaneously visible from either the left or right side. Again, I'm using the same map as previously. In the last couple videos, we created two adjacent zones with very similar platforms on the left and right. And then there are portals that allow you to see from the right to the left and from the left to the right. What we're going to do is create a transition zone so we can have some shared geometry between those two zones. First, I'm going to demonstrate how this is useful. I'm going to create a beam that crosses the two zones. Right now it's just going to be a child of the left zone. So I just draw a box, crosses over. Need to shrink this down a bit. I'll move it up. Okay, so this gives us a beam that goes across from the left to the right. If we go load the level editor, we can see here's our beam. For the most part, it looks alright in this view, but you'll notice as my portal goes out of view, and my portal's framed by these two columns here. So as that portal goes out of view, that beam disappears. Another thing that's going on that's a problem potentially is that there's no collision detection if I'm on the right side. So this beam is a child of the left side, the left zone, and I can just walk straight through. Even if I can see it, it's not colliding with me. Now let's go to the other side real quick. So I'm running over to the left zone, and you can see I can run into it, and it stays visible at all times. Even if the portal that allows me to see from the left to the right is not in view, I can still see it at all times, and it's collidable at all times. So this is where transition zones are useful. If I need to have geometry that's shared between two zones, I can actually place that in a transition zone, and that will allow it to be both visible at all times from either side, and the collision detection will work at all times. Now there's two approaches you can take actually. One is you could just divide this geometry in half, right, where the faces of the zone match up. So I could just slice that beam in half and just make it actually two pieces of geometry. And that's certainly doable, but in other cases, if you have a much more complicated piece of geometry, perhaps an imported mesh, that wouldn't really be appropriate to do. You might introduce a lot more triangles or seams in your model. So that's the sort of scenario where you'd actually want to use a transition zone, so you can leave the geometry intact and then just let the game engine handle it. So let's go back to the world editor. To create a transition zone is actually pretty simple, especially if you're converting an existing direct portal over to using a transition zone. Here I'm just going to use the zone tool, draw a box zone. The rule with a transition zone is it needs to completely contain your portals. Spatially, it needs to contain those portals and the entirety of your geometry. So I'm going to draw this in the overhead view to fully contain the the portals as well as the beam that I just drew. Now this transition zone is pretty big because I made this this long beam that's shared across the two. So this might be a bit odd compared to you know, more realistic scenario, but it should still work. So okay, so I've drawn out the zone, and actually since the target zone is still set as the left zone, it placed it there. That's actually not what we want. Let's just drag it out and place it under the infinite zone, so it should be a sibling with the other zones. Let me go to the property page for this new zone. There's a couple things we need to do. Primarily, we need to set this as a transition zone. That's definitely something that's necessary. The other thing, I want to give it a name, so we just call it trans zone. Okay, so now we have this transition zone. Now spatially it contains the shared geometry and the portals, but we actually need to modify relationships in the scene graph as well. We actually need to move our direct portals that are children of the right and left zone. We need to move those into the transition zone. Now if you're starting from scratch and already know you need a transition zone, you would just build your portals directly in the transition zone. So the only thing that changes is the relationship under the scene graph. You still need to have your direct portals linked, you know, one to the right side, one to the left side. The other thing, I'll move my shared geometry, the floating beam, I'm going to move under the transition zone. And that should be all we really need to do. So let's save and play the world. Okay, so now still looks similar as before, but you'll notice that when the portal goes out of view, you can see the ground or the platform on the other side is disappearing. However, this hovering beam stays in place. And I can show you that the collision detection is working, so I can bump into it. See, it won't let me slide through it anymore. And let me run to the other side and I'll show you it's still working properly. So I can bump into it, and it renders at all times, no matter whether the portal is in view. So that demonstrates how to set up a transition zone. And again, you mainly will want to use this when you have some sort of shared geometry that you need to have, you know, like a elaborate doorway, or perhaps the entrance to a cave. You might have some geometry that is just easier if it's shared between the two sides. It also lets you set up blended lighting and some other effects I won't go into in detail, but you know, basically it averages out the lighting conditions. So you might have noticed that this beam has gotten a little bit brighter now because it's got some of the lighting from this other zone on it. So the right zone, some of the lighting is now on it. So that concludes this video.